right, thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. We're happy to be here. The SS Minnow was not available for this 4-hour tour, so we decided to take the SS CMMC this time. So we're really happy to be with you this morning. Talk about CMMC and security and compliance for the next few hours. In our first session up today, we're talking about DoD rulemaking. Who does not love a little DoD rulemaking in the morning, right? And so we have Jacob here to talk about DoD rulemaking, and we're going to have a good discussion on this, I think. And so, Jacob, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you and let us get started.
Thanks, Scott. Aloha, everybody. A nice laid-back summertime conversation, like you said, about rulemaking. Nobody wants to do anything more on summer break and in the morning than talking about rulemaking. But as we're going to talk about, industry, updating industry on what's going on is becoming increasingly important because DoD is sort of communicating to industry less and less, despite the fact that they're doing more and more. So I think people will find this session very, very interesting. So let's get into it. So a couple of things that we need to talk about in order to sort of paint the overall picture about what's happened, what's going on, what to expect coming up. One is the basics of what is involved with the remainder of the rulemaking process. This entire CMMC conversation is dominated by rulemaking. It's sort of hanging over the process, but rulemaking, as we've come to find out over the last few years, very opaque, very just sort of non-intuitive process that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So when you hear, oh yeah, we're waiting on rulemaking, nobody really knows what that means. So we're going to outline kind of what the basic things are that still need to happen, and then compare that with DoD's recent statements and sort of DoD's statements over the last 12 months or so. Because when you start to line up all of DoD's recent statements together with what remains over rulemaking, the picture starts to become pretty clear. But even if you were to take DoD's statements, even if you were to sort of catch these things that they've said here and there, it's very difficult to visualize what's going on with the way that this could play out and the handful of ways it could play out. So we're going to spend some time sort of drawing the timeline and visualizing what's going on with those rulemaking events based off what DoD has said. And then one of the more interesting recent developments that's happened was a DoD IG report that came out that specifically investigated this problem of CUI not being very well marked coming from the DoD going into the supply chain. And I think that's going to have big effects moving forward of the look and feel of CMMC and CUI. So we're definitely going to spend some time talking about that. We'll wrap it up with the key takeaways and then point some people to some resources and next steps once they have a better idea of what's going on.
That's great. Looks like a great agenda, Jacob. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Great. Okay, so the first one here, like I said, is going to be the basics of rulemaking and recent DoD statements. So this goes back to about a year ago, and what people should notice immediately is that the majority of these pictures from the events in which these quotes were taken are congressional hearings. These are things that DoD has said in testimony to the Armed Services Committee in the House and the Senate about the status of the program. Most people don't make a habit of watching these hearings. And so unless you were to catch a direct quote, maybe in a random news article, you wouldn't actually know what DoD is saying. DoD has, sort of gotten out of the habit of doing many webinars and many events and many updates about the CMMC program directly to industry for a variety of reasons. The main reason why I've heard from them that they've gotten out of the 2019, 2020 era habit of just a relentless cadence of these webinars and interviews and podcasts and in-person presentations is that they believe that they've already said it enough and that it's going to be sufficient based off what they've said so far for industry to know that it's a real thing. So when you don't hear from DoD directly, but you listen to what they tell Congress, they are still saying the same things that they said all along, that it's a huge priority, that the program is still happening, and that they're trying to put CMMC in contracts as soon as possible. So this sort of leads to the first gap that I often see, is that when people in industry don't hear from DoD, it sort of fuels confirmation bias that nothing is happening. But if you go listen to what they tell Congress, the people that they have to answer to according to the NDAA that prompted the CMMC program, they are still pedal to the metal and engaging with the rulemaking process. So there's a big gap in terms of public perception versus what DoD is actually saying. Most recently, what DoD has said is that they're going to send the CMMC rule, the CMMC regulation, over to the Small Business Administration for review prior to the remaining steps of the rulemaking process. In addition to that, Dave McEwen said in May that they're targeting for fall of next year, so the fall of 2024, for CMMC to be put into contracts. And so, like I said, they're still emphasizing that this is incredibly important, but it's going to be easier to see in a moment when we start to map out what these two things mean. But before we do that, the question I had for you, Scott, is, you talk to a lot of people in terms of the industry and the primes and the DoD. Summit 7 is sort of uniquely positioned based off of how we operate and the way that we do business, as sort of central between DoD and the major primes and the small suppliers. So, are you hearing this sort of gap in perception as well? Because I know that we often hear very different things from DoD and the primes versus what people think the DoD and the primes are doing. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, in general, I hear a lot of just general frustration in the industry right now. Like you said, DoD is not talking a lot directly to industry right now. They're not talking a lot even to the CMMC ecosystem. They're really just talking to Congress and internally right now for the most part. And that lack of communication has, it does create frustration among, small contractors, especially because they don't really know what's going on or what to expect. They know that, or a lot of them know, quote unquote, know that this thing is still coming, but they don't really understand what real timelines are. And they don't understand, what they need to be doing to get in the right position. And that's why we, continually tell people, yes, this is still happening. Here's the timeline, like we're doing today, of what we expect to happen. But then when we do these kinds of sessions, and things continue to push, we've had said a lot of these same things over the last 4 to 6 months, expecting DoD to release the rule to OMB, but it hasn't happened yet, and we're still waiting on that. And that does cause a lot of frustration among the small companies, for multiple reasons. One, in many of these companies, you have IT managers pushing their CEOs for budget, for timeline to actually implement because they know that this is coming.
Right.
But then the CEO who is having to fund this, relatively expensive transformation for their company, then, the timeline that their IT manager gave them goes and passes and nothing's happened yet. And that causes a lot of internal frustration with the IT managers and the IT staffs and the compliance staffs within these companies, because they feel like they're losing credibility with their executive team because, they're following the words that have been put out by DoD on timelines and such like that.
Right.
So
Right.
in general, frustration is what I would say the general ecosystem has right now with the CMMC as a whole. They understand that they need to implement these security requirements. They understand that it's good security in most cases. There are, the holdouts that, just don't want to do it for whatever reason because it is expensive. They don't believe that it's going to make a difference, whatever those reasons are. But the majority of people just are frustrated.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's dangerous. It's a dangerous situation because by having, from a DoD perspective, this is a classic hurry up and wait scenario. It's really not anything different from the way that they do business. But when you have this sort of growing gap in perception, it can cause a lot of cascading issues. So, if we move on to the sort of basics of what remains in the rulemaking process, hopefully when we draw these timelines, it will help people maybe map it out to their leadership in order to say, what's coming on in the future. So.
All right, don't go anywhere because in a few minutes, Ryan Bonner and Jason Sprosser are going to play a little bit of Marco with CUI. We'll see you soon.